Today I'm going to be talking about predictive states and how they exert bias in pain perception. So overall, I'll first show you some new evidence that schema-based predictions, they do have a very strong hold on in biasing pain perception. Followed by that, I will be talking about how we have some evidence that top-down, large-scale network properties, they have a role to play in top-down effects on pain perception and treatment responses. So this talk is inspired by the predictive processing model. It's an elegant model. It's a principal deductive approach that allows us to think about brain function and in a deductive way. And it's based on the simple Bayesian inference idea that our brains, they're gathering information and they're building a prior model, like a prior model, and then we gather more and more evidence to make our existing priors more and more matched with our external reality. And this is a mechanism for us to minimize errors in our perception or in our decision making. And it's also a good mechanism for keeping uncertainty and our degrees of freedom under check. So the existing studies that have been done on this are mostly model driven, and the empirical evidence has been sparse. And this is also interesting from the perspective of understanding how much of our perception is veridical and based on actual events that are occurring in our environment, and how much of it is created by these top-down processes in the brain. And so from this vantage point, if you think about it, you can think of perception as the process of giving meaning to the external world. We learn about unfamiliar things, we learn about events, and our brains can organize this information into meaningful units. And then from that, we build these higher order concepts that help us infer the state of the world. And these inferences, they have an influence on perception. So when you see this image, I would like you to take a moment and think about what is the first thing that comes to your head when you see this image. A chair. Anyone else? So depending on how much you're familiar with art, you will be able to immediately detect that this is a painting by Van Gogh, and you will also be able to detect details like Van Gogh's pipe on that chair. Whereas if we don't have that prior information, all we will see is a chair, or we'll be amazed by the colors of this image. And this is just an example of how our brains are actively seeking out information in a goal-directed way where we have a prior, and that is controlling how we're going to perceive reality. In fact, in this talk, the only things you will be paying attention to will be things that are relevant to you and things that are meaningful to you, and a lot of other information will be gleaned over. So this kind of prior inference has a key role to play in pain perception. So if we think about pain, it's really an aversive signal. It helps us understand the context. For example, a knife it can be a threat in one situation, and it can be a tool in another one. And we learn this over our lifetime, and we are able to detect inherent danger in objects. And this enables threat detection, and it's important for our survival. But another interesting aspect of pain is that it allows us to explore. So we are able to gauge the intensity of pain to figure out how much of this can I take, how much farther can I go. And as we are detecting these threats and exploring our world, we are able to habituate these pains, adapt these pain responses, so that and this process enables us to function and explore our surroundings. So in the area of pain research, we're still stuck with this bottom-up pain model. It's probably as old as Descartes. And the idea is that there's an external stimulus, it exceeds a threshold, information is passed on to the brain, it activates a certain part of the brain, and you feel pain. But there are several phenomena where there are nonlinearities between our pain experience and the external stimulus. A very well-known example is placebo responses. And then you can also modulate pain by distraction and attention effects. There's expectation effects. There's this thing called offset analgesia. You can look it up. It's a very interesting nonlinearity between stimulus and pain responses that can be observed. And then we have chronic pains, where people are suffering with pain when there's no clear symptoms or tissue damage that can be detected. And interestingly, pain is also a useful area to study predictive processing, because there's a very clear top-down circuitry in pain pathways. So not only is pain information So not only can pain information go up to the brain, there's also circuits that are sending contextual information down to the brainstem. And the bottom-up and the top-down systems, they interact at this level to either amplify or dampen the experience of pain. And in terms of this contextual processing and the role of the brain in processing pain, it has a strong component of schemas. And schemas, it's an idea borrowed from the social psychology, and it's basically a placeholder for us to understand how mental frameworks organize conceptual information, organize it, categorize it. And in a sense, it's also a way of thinking about our maps of reality, and that where we're developing a certain mental framework, we match it to our external world, and this can improve with learning and experience. But it has been suggested that schemas tend to be very tenacious and they're a source of bias. So, but the empirical evidence in neuroscience has been relatively sparse. So the question we've asked in the first study that I'm going to show you is, do schema-based predictions implicitly control pain perception? And this is an underexplored area in pain research. So the idea we're testing is, how does the brain create this perception of pain? Is it a combination of prior information and evidence? And if we introduce prediction errors, is the pain perception going to be updated based on the new evidence, or is it going to be still biased towards the priors? And another idea that we've borrowed from the predictive processing world is that if you have higher levels of prediction errors, does that increase your level of uncertainty and confidence about events? And so what we're trying to do here is to gather empirical evidence that is not model-driven. Instead, it's basic, simple schema-based model. And what we have used here is a simple linear combination of stimulus and cue. And we want to look at how much the pain perception is updated by the prediction errors. So we've studied healthy subjects, and we present them with these epochs, which consist of a cue followed by a pain stimulus, and then we ask them to rate the pain. The association between the cues and the stimulus are organized so that they're pseudo-randomly presented associations between a value and a stimulus intensity. And the participants during a matched run are expected to rate the pain, and then we rank the pain responses based on an increase in the values and the stimulus to see if their pain perception is following this implicit linear association. And in the next trials, in the next set of trials, we introduce prediction errors. First, and we do that systematically in an increasing fashion. First, we have a mismatch phase 1, in which the prediction errors, they range from 0 to 1.2 degrees. And in the mismatch phase 2, the prediction errors range from 0 to 3.2 degrees. And then to test the effects on uncertainty and the link between prediction errors and uncertainty, we have 25% stimuli that are presented without a Q value. And in addition, we also collected the functional MRI data and looked at mood, behavior, and cognitive measures. So when we organize the pain responses based on a linear increase in Q values and stimulus, what we see is that the participants, their pain ratings, they're following a linear schema. And the circled pain response is to a stimulus Q that had no Q value presented alongside with it. So in a sense, this shows us that they're fitting their pain responses on the linear schema, and if there was no Q value, then the pain responses would look like this. So for prediction errors at the mismatch level 1, what we see is that if you pay attention to this axis over here, you can see that the stimulus is no longer going up in a linear fashion. Instead, it is at 47 degrees for this range of Qs and 45 degrees for this other range of Qs. And the reference line at the back represents the matched condition, and the green line represents the pain responses in the presence of this first level of prediction errors. And you can see that there's a strong match between them. And when we calculate the update, it is about 10 to 12% based on the prediction errors. The second panel, in the second figure, you can see that now the temperature is 47 degrees. It is the same temperature being presented with these different Q values, and these are the responses, the orange line over here. And as you can see that there is a little bit of an update from the reference line. It's about 20% update. And the pain responses, they're still following this Q-based top-down prediction and not necessarily updating a lot based on the stimulus perception. When we look at the brain responses and compare the most extreme conditions of 0 versus maximum prediction errors, this is what we see. When there's top-down processing happening, you will see the frontal parietal networks, and you see the OFC and the ventral medial prefrontal cortex, regions that we know are involved in top-down perceptual effects on pain. And this is the bottom-up circuitry where we see influences on the insula and the S2 in specific regions. And then we also see effects on the putamen and the parahippocampal gyrus and the periaqueductal gray area. So that tells us that there's a strong relationship between this top-down information and the bottom-up stimulus information that's coming in, and that there is a strong bias towards this top-down information. And when we explore the mediators of this perceptual bias, we see a strong connection with pain catastrophizing. So more a person is biased towards this top-down Q value, the higher were their catastrophizing scores, and this was particularly more significant for their rumination about pain. Another thing we found is that there's a strong link with working memory. So the higher their performance on a working memory task, the higher their bias. And the opposite relationship was observed for aging and mindfulness. So we measured mindfulness using the 5-facet mindfulness questionnaire, and it's a measure of their inner awareness. So higher their inner awareness, less their bias. So in this next figure, I'm going to show you how these prediction errors affect uncertainty. So when we look at the uncertainty as a variance between their pain reports from trial to trial within a condition, so their level of confidence about what the pain responses should be like, there is not that much change as we increase the prediction errors in a stepwise way. But for stimuli that were unfamiliar, that were presented without cues, there's a sharp increase in their uncertainty with the increases in prediction error. And this is also individual related. So more a person is biased by this top-down information, the higher their uncertainty towards these unfamiliar, uncued stimuli. And it's found both for the lower level and the higher level of prediction errors. So I'm going to, but for the interest of time, quickly go over some of the work I've done with relation to large-scale brain networks and how they play a role in these top-down effects. So it's more of a working hypothesis that we're investigating. So the brain network property that I have been working on for some of these studies is to look at the level of segregation versus integration in brain networks. When we talk about higher level of integration, what that basically means is that you have fewer modules, and your modules are more connected with each other. So there's shorter path lengths. Whereas the segregation measures, they will look at the number of modules and also connections within the modules, and the path length will be lowered. In one of my studies, I've seen that this is a meaningful measure related to conscious perception. And if when we look at effects of this anesthetic called dexmedetomidine, we see a clear change, a drop in both segregation and integration properties during the unconscious stage, and then it recovers as people are coming back to consciousness. So this was measured as local and global efficiency. And another piece of evidence that directs us to the significance of the segregation versus integration measure is that it does show a pattern of change when we look, a pattern of change in brain development when we look at it in MEG data, in the band-limited power. And in fact, there are the opposite patterns. Where the beta networks are becoming more locally organized, more optimized and segregated, whereas the gamma networks are becoming more distributed and globally connected. So from this, we were interested in understanding why there's a variance across individuals in their treatment responses and what role top-down processes play in this variance across individuals. And our working hypothesis is that this variability in top-down capacity is linked with this balance of segregation versus integration in the brain. So in one of our published studies, we've seen that the higher the level of integration, higher level of clustering, it observed at baseline is predicted of the expectation effects on treatment responses. And interestingly, the regions that show this effect are related to the default mode network, the anterior insula, the hippocampus, and nucleus accumbens. So hold on to that thought. There's a pattern here. So we have multiple data sets that we have tried to reproduce this finding, and we're seeing a reproducibility across different experimental models and different populations of individuals, and that tells us that that there's something going on there, and it's and this is why we're investigating this by using these different models so they can verify our findings and test their accuracy. So another piece of evidence that links to this treatment response and top-down effects is that it also predicts participant engagement. So this is our OHBM poster 1971 that Marzi Sagai will be presenting. And to summarize that poster, we're again seeing a relationship between network segregation and the amount of engagement an individual shows in relation to a meditation practice. So the higher the clustering coefficients in the brain, the more practice assignments, the more meditation practices this individual performed. And when we look at the regions that show this effect is again the default mode network, the anterior insula, the hippocampus, and the nucleus accumbens. So there's some reward-based and motivational and aversive mechanism to this response that we're being able to see at the mean level at the brain when we aggregate this value as a mean clustering coefficient from across the brain. So what we've talked about here is that schemas, they do induce enduring bias in pain perception, and that top-down networks, they may have a role to play in this top-down effect on pain processing and may be useful for predicting treatment outcomes. So with that, I will just highlight some of my previous collaborators and the labs I've trained in. And this is our lab, so be happy to take any questions that you may have.